Welcome to Private Equity Profits. Clifford Locks is a certified board of director, a trusted confidant to CEOs, C-level exec, and high-potential employees to help them clarify goals, unlock their potential, and create actionable strategic plans. Seth Greene is the nation's foremost authority on growing your portfolio companies with direct response marketing. He is the founder of the direct response marketing firm Market Domination LLC, and he is an 8-time best-selling author who has been interviewed on NBC, CBS, Forbes Inc., CBS Money Watch, and many more. Cliff and Seth interview top players in the financial sector, focusing on private equity firms, venture capital companies, and family offices, discussing developments and trends shaping the industry. These experts will share with you how they've grown their businesses and increased profit, and how you can too. And now, here's your host, Cliff Locks.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Private Equity Profits Podcast. I'm Cliff Locks, your host, and today our guest is Brandon Greene. Brandon Greene is an internationally celebrated serial entrepreneur, best known for co-founding and growing one of the nation's most successful real estate organizations, Keller Williams Capital Properties. With sales exceeding $2 billion annually, Brandon is the founder and CEO of Chapter2Ventures, a Washington, D.C. based holding company on a mission to help entrepreneurs build sustainable wealth through learning, investing, and connecting. Chapter2Ventures operates several high-impact businesses, including the Alchemy of Money, a financial training and investing platform for business owners, design firms, tech startups, and luxury hotel brands. Chapter2Ventures' official charity partner is the Alchemy Foundation, a not-for-profit focused on financial literacy and supporting early-stage entrepreneurs. Brandon's on a mission to help entrepreneurs increase their leadership capacity and build sustainable wealth for themselves through technology, learning experiences, and impact investments. As a keynote speaker for more than 20 years, Brandon has brought his message of reinvention to more than 1 million people across the United States, Canada, and Europe. Brandon has been featured in the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Inc., and Fortune magazine. Brandon, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Cliff, thank you for having me. It is my pleasure.
Appreciate that a great deal. Tell me about your background and how you ended up in real estate and your entry point into the business world.
Yeah, so my background, I was born in Wyoming, grew up in Iowa, and I graduated from high school and decided I wanted to go on the road with a musical organization, actually.
Right.
And that was a ton of fun. I traveled around the world for a couple of years. And at one point, I realized it was time to make a decision to either pursue music full time or something else. And I decided something else because I felt I wanted to control my own destiny a little bit more than I perceived that I could in music. And so I ended up in the Washington, D.C. area because I knew a friend who lived here and got a job in sales at a staffing agency for a while. And then one evening I watched an infomercial, it's a true story, about how to buy real estate, no money down. And I thought, well, that's great because I don't have any money to put down. And I ordered the course, and I learned there was a lot more to it than what was in the course, though it inspired me to make a big move. Got my license as a real estate sales professional. And that was my entry into real estate, was from how do I broker deals for other people and maybe even buy one myself, which I did. I brought my very first home on Capitol Hill, a burned out foreclosure property in 2000.
Okay. You founded Keller Williams Capital Properties and turned it into one of the nation's most successful real estate organizations. What were the challenges associated with starting the company, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so I started in sales as just a neighborhood realtor, right? And working with home buyers and sellers, and did that for a few years, door knocking, just a lot of ground game, solo entrepreneur hustle. And at some point, though, I realized I wanted to transition from being a salesperson to a business person. And I truly did not know what that meant. I had a sort of an intellectual idea, though, I thought sales requires so much of my personal effort. Could I build a business that I could leverage through others' over a period of time. And I did a transaction with a gentleman who was also a salesperson in real estate, and we got along really well. His name is Bo Minkiti. And we started talking, and we both had the same aspiration about the evolution of our sales practice into a business structure. And we started to talk about, well, what would that look like exactly? And so we launched Keller Williams Capital Properties in 2006 together with a couple other partners. And we began that journey that a lot of entrepreneurs go through, which is that transition from being a salesperson to a business owner, and all the challenges and opportunities that are associated with that process.
It's interesting, when you look at it, you saw the opportunity in real estate. At some point, you figured out the value proposition there.
Yes, I had an inkling that the stuff that I thought was really valuable from a brokerage to me as a salesperson could evolve a little bit. And that if we could find a more innovative approach to the partnership between a real estate sales professional and the brokerage, then we might have something to work with. And that ended up being true, right? We ended up launching the brokerage with the idea that we needed to treat agents as entrepreneurs, as business owners, and teach them more than sales skills so that they could build their business. That became the white space for us. And we positioned ourselves differently in that relationship between broker and agent. And a lot in partnership with the franchise ownership of Keller Williams Global, right? They're the ones that really had the original idea. So I can't take credit for that. But at the local level, we figured out how to implement that. And we also figured out that we needed a degree of scale in order to compete with the other real estate firms in Washington, D.C. As you can imagine, it's a very competitive real estate environment in Washington. And so we thought, well, just having a few people be excited about what we were doing would not have the level of impact we wanted. And so we set early on a vision for a regional company that we would be able to have decent scale in Washington, Maryland, and Virginia.
Very good. Yeah, my son's down in Maryland and is enjoying that aspect. It's such a vibrant market.
Yes.
And I guess the federal government has been feeding it quite well for many, many years.
And that helps a lot. Yes, it does.
You're very crystal clear on your business model of value to your partners, which are the salespeople. So you recognize that very early. Yes.
Yeah. Well, we realized early, and this has been very informative throughout my career, that you have the stakeholders in any business enterprise, but then you have these other sort of partners that are influencers in that environment. And it's kind of complex, right? It's not just about one person. For example, in real estate, we realized, yes, it's about the buyer or the seller or the investor, whoever the end user, so to speak, is of that real estate service. But the person who's delivering it actually is the one that is the influencer in the whole thing. And they're the ones that kind of make or break it, right? So we thought, well, let's focus our efforts on the service provider versus the end consumer. And how do we make sure that what their experience looks like is top notch? And we believed, and it turned out to be true, that if we do that, then the experience they deliver to the consumer is top notch too, right? So I think, the lesson for me in that early on was, in any business, you've got to recognize there's this line of customer interaction points, and you've got to figure out where you're going to play. Where's the white space for you? And how do you put all your energy and effort there? And hopefully, if you get it right, it's a domino effect, and it knocks down the others throughout that chain.
Yeah, because I see in industry, we'll use something called the Net Promoter Score.
Right. Yes.
We have set KPIs, and you're looking to, what are we measuring? Let's talk about it on the front end, and then give you the tools so you can thrive and do well and get compensated for doing well.
Exactly.
Versus these annual reviews, which is, it's too late. You should be having these conversations on a weekly or monthly basis with your team.
Exactly. And for salespeople, that's easier, right? You can see activity leads to appointments, and there's a conversion to that, and appointments lead to certain sales and leads to profit, et cetera. That becomes a lot more interesting and challenging as the organization grows when you're applying that same principle to, say, an operations person or an accounting person. But that same principle, albeit harder for those folks, is still just as important.
So they're an internal client versus
Sure.
an external client. And they're playing an
Yes.
extremely important role to support the team.
Yes.
Yeah. How has the real estate market changed since you got into it? And what are the trends in real estate investing today?
Yeah. So, the real estate market has changed significantly in that when I got into it, it was sort of the latter stage of the idea that the real estate broker was the key to the transaction access, right? We were still in early days of web platforms where real estate information was accessible to the consumer freely and transparently. And so there were a lot of folks kind of still trying to hold on to that idea that if you want to do something in real estate, you have to come through me, the broker, right? Because I've got the information. It was waning, but there was still a lot of that in the early days. Now it's the entire opposite, right? Nobody needs a broker for the information. It's available online in a multitude of platforms. The problem now is, how do you interpret all that information? Like, information alone is not helpful. And so the big change that's happened in that area of the business, and I can tell you a little bit more about the market, is the role of the real estate professional has had to evolve significantly from the information gatekeeper to the context provider or the consultant in a broader process, which has required that professional to have a much wider skill set that now interacts with technology on a day-to-day basis. So it's changed a tremendous amount, and that's a good thing, I think. Right? It is at the end of the day, the consumer is being served a lot better by having that information, and we have to be helpful in providing the context so they know what to do with it.
Very, very good. I had just sold one of my homes, like it's 2 years now, it'll be 2 years March, and I saw that the broker was extremely important to close this deal. In other words, to keep the parties together. And I could see the seller, which is us, had an advantage because the broker was so professional and well polished and well educated, versus the buyer's broker. It was a painful experience there. So I'm finding my broker was actually doing both sides of the transaction, and it allowed the deal to close. So
yes.
Huge
And there's
difference.
A huge difference. And there's an interesting debate, or there's an interesting initiative, I would say, which is, can technology eventually replace that and have this holy grail, one platform, everything is done for you in an integrated fashion? And a lot of people are putting a lot of money behind that idea. I think, though, until you've done a deal or bought a home or sold a home, you don't realize we're still a long way away from that, right? The emotional people component of it, especially in residential real estate, where it's not about, in many cases, just the numbers. It's about, where you want to raise your family. Like that we're still a ways away from getting AI to nail that.
Excellent. Before we were interviewing, we were talking about the metaverse and crypto and tokenization, and it all fits into that ecosystem.
Yes.
I don't think we're going to get away from the individual emotional aspect of buying one of the largest purchases for the average family. So the broker has a very important role.
I believe so.
And thinking AI is going to take this all over. I think AI may assist the broker.
Yes.
And it may have something where it's got the ability with natural language processing to absorb the conversation between the broker and the buyer or seller, depending on which end you're on that deal. It may be able to provide some remedial or hints on the underlying foundation, things that need to get addressed on that buying journey or selling journey to expedite the transaction, but make it a better, warmer, more educated experience by allowing the AI to listen to the dialogue that's taking place.
Yes, I agree. And I think too, it will help in functionary aspects of it, like search, right? Right now, if you search for real estate, we're still 15 years behind in that you're still searching for the same criteria: price, bedrooms, bathrooms, neighborhoods, et cetera. We're going to have much more intuitive search features that will be available based on the data that we have on you as a consumer of other goods and services.
Absolutely.
That will make the whole thing easier. There are people experimenting with that. It's still quite messy and not particularly accurate, but I'm sure we'll get there.
Okay. That's exciting. That gets me very, very thrilled to see what's taking place on that side of it, because you're showing me things that don't fit the criteria. In the old days, we didn't even have multiple listings.
True.
Okay. So at that
Exactly.
point, the real estate agent really only had the data at that point. They'd get you to go out and see 10 homes. But now
Yes.
we're seeing 50, 60 homes online, maybe 100 homes. But that search on the psychological and economical is a very exciting piece of it, to put the right
Exactly.
individual in the right home where they are this is just a great match.
Right.
Referrals will probably be very, very positive with that
Mhm.
broker at
Yeah,
that point.
I think so. There will be less brokers, I think, because of that.
Yeah.
But those that are part of the value chain there will be even more valuable.
You founded and you're the CEO of Chapter2Ventures. Tell us
Mhm.
about the
Yes.
company and your big why for starting it.
Yes. So over the last few years, I've gotten clearer and clearer on what I just really love to do. And that is to help fellow entrepreneurs on that journey to profitability or impact. I got into the business without a financial or business background. I didn't even go to college, right? So I'm very much self-taught, and there were a lot of challenges with that approach. And I'm very happy that that's the path I chose. But now, 20 years into my career, I'm excited about helping people shorten their learning curve around growing their business, particularly around the profitability side of it. I got in as a salesperson, right? Which is like, how do I make more sales, generate more revenue? And only after a few years realized, well, there's this whole other part called profit, and like you've got to figure out how to manage that. And so now in my 40s, I'm like, I love helping younger people and other entrepreneurs or business owners that aren't so young, but are great at delivering their product or service, help focus on their profit and their wealth building. We as business owners put so much into our businesses and our clients.
Mhm.
We sometimes forget to put our own oxygen mask on first.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited about that. Chapter2Ventures is a holding company that allows me to have a variety of ventures underneath it to support that idea, which is how do I support entrepreneurs in the growth of their goals as it relates to their business, which is a critical component to that, so that they can build wealth and prosperity for themselves as well.
I like that. That's your legacy. Think about
Yes,
it.
I feel that.
You're giving
I feel
back.
that.
Very
Yeah.
nicely.
Yes, and I love business too. And so it's been exciting in this, let's call it the second chapter, which is where Chapter2Ventures comes from as a holding company, to create another company called the Alchemy of Money, which is designed to do that specifically.
Excellent.
And so, yeah, I absolutely feel that is a big part of my legacy in this chapter of my career.
Great. Yeah, I'm happy for you.
Thank you.
So Chapter2Ventures has a mission of service to others, looking to create sustainable wealth. What do you consider as the cornerstones to creating that wealth?
Yeah, I love that you asked that question, because if you go on Twitter or whatever and you look at wealth building, there's an enormous amount of content around that idea. And two thoughts. One is it's very subjective. And second is it's incredibly difficult to figure out what to do first. And so what I have identified that I believe is a critical pillar, the first pillar, is you have to know your numbers. And what I mean by that is you need to be getting a profit and loss statement and a balance sheet from a bookkeeper on a monthly basis, if not more frequently. You need to understand what the numbers say and what they mean and how to interpret that data. And until that's happening, other aspirations about building wealth are frankly going to be based on luck. And who wants that as a strategy? So in some ways, I go back to the boring basics, which is, hey, what's your bookkeeping look like? Right? Are you getting a P&L? Are you getting a balance sheet? Do you even know what it says? So before we start talking about interesting and exciting investments in real estate or crypto or whatever, what does your balance sheet say? And do you even know? And how do we help you with that as a fundamental first step, a first pillar to success around building wealth?
Well said. If you look at the universities at this point, if you're not in an MBA program, you're probably not addressing any of those important.
Where are you going to get it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have started approaching this topic from an education standpoint only. And I believe that is a lot of it. And what I found was people, as much as they loved coming to a keynote or a class or a workshop, when it came to the implementation, a lot of things fell flat, in part because most of us get into business because we love our product or service or had an idea. We don't get in saying, gosh, I just love accounting. Like it is. So there's a big gap between that and the entrepreneur, and closing that gap is what I really love to do.
Knowing your numbers. Let's just be honest.
knowing your
it's
numbers,
critical. Yeah.
knowing at any moment in time where you are and revenue and profitability and what makes up those components.
Very good.
And if you do know that, then we can have more interesting, sexy conversations
Right.
about what are you doing with the delta, the profitability? Are you managing your taxes? Let's make sure that's happening. Now we've got some opportunity. We've got some extra powder to invest.
Excellent.
And now you can talk, as you know, right? How do you allocate the dollars you have in investments? How much is it going to be in this and this and this and risk tolerance? It's a whole nother world that a lot of people skip to that without doing the fundamental work first.
It's a very good message at this point, because a lot of our listeners are very high and ultra high net worth individuals, and they
Yes.
have their children are coming up.
Yes.
They'll have the fiduciary responsibility of these large assets that need to get put to work. And these learning opportunities here is the foundation for the wealth to continue generation 2, 3, and in perpetuity.
Right.
It's not going to be an accident. No, it's us putting the time and effort into the youth to embrace best practices in the financial education. And then we'll also listen, because, the dynamics in the social media is creating some other feedback. In other words, things that we may not agree with, but capitalism at the end of the day works.
Right. Yes.
So
I love that you hit on that. I think for those of us that succeed financially, we have a duty to give back to the next generation that insight, that education, that mentoring, to make sure, because we're not, like you said, we're not getting it in formal education in most cases. And if that's not happening, it's going to have to happen at home or with a mentorship or some other way. And, there's a lot of other things we want to do in our life, and then they're a lot easier if we're financially secure, right? And bringing that principle along, certainly to the next generation, is very important.
It's an excellent message. What are your guiding principles for investing for you?
Yeah. So I look at investing in an allocation, really, where I say, look, there's 5 to 10% of my investment dollars I'm going to invest in air quotes, because it's a bit more of a gamble. So I personally think, for example, we're in such early days around crypto. We're in the AOL days around crypto. I had no idea. NFTs, who knows? But I'm willing to put some dollars on that, but it's a finite amount, because to me, it feels like gambling.
Okay.
But, it's going somewhere. I just don't know where, right? So 5-10% is kind of where I'm allocating on that. Then, 40-ish% I'm putting in an area that I really feel, maybe even 50% of where I feel like I've got solid expertise, right? I know the work, like, real estate. I know real estate really, really well. So a lot of my holdings, probably more than 50% actually, are in real estate. But I feel good about that because I can maximize my return, not just by using my capital, but by using my time and energy and expertise, right? So it makes sense to me to put a large chunk in there. And then I'd say the remaining amount I'm putting in, public market opportunities or friends and family investments, where it's really more about the entrepreneur as a private equity investment than it is necessarily about their thing. Like maybe their thing will or will not work out, but if I get in early on that entrepreneur, something they do is going to work out. Right. So, I have a conservative allocation of my investments in, the public equities market, but, I'm finding interesting startup opportunities where I believe certainly in the business, but mostly in the entrepreneur playing a long game, saying if he or she doesn't succeed in this thing, they're going to succeed in the next. And I want to be on that short list of that call, because they're in rooms and having opportunities I'm not having. Very good. So I want a good percentage of portfolio put in there. So that's how I think about my investment world right now. And I think that percentage of this, that, or the other changes as I get older, but that's kind of where it is right now.
You brought something up interesting. The idea, when we write a check to an entrepreneur, it's about the individual or the team. It's not really always about the product. They're going to pivot. They'll figure it out over time. And that leads me to my next question. You serve on several boards. Tell us about those experiences.
Yes. So I'm a big fan of board service as it relates to both impact and giving back as a pillar of being a good citizen, I believe. And also just the people, the network that you are able to curate and how interesting that can be. So I'll give you an example. One of the boards I'm on is a choral arts organization, right? It's a nonprofit, small organization. And I'm learning a lot about the running of a nonprofit, right? That's not what my background has been. And I'm also learning a lot about the impact I can have in that small organization as a businessman. And I love music. So it's a fun passion. It's not, doesn't feel like work to me. So I would certainly encourage anyone who's listening who may not be on board service yet to explore that. And, young people sometimes say, well, how do I get on a board? And, go to nonprofits that you're passionate about. And after a little bit of door knocking, I'll bet you'll get on one. And then you can grow from there, right, into maybe even more sophisticated corporate board service at some point. So yeah, I think boards are a great way to get back.
So you made a very good point. You start at the non-for-profit community. You may need to write a check, so may it not be a surprise. So when you look at our younger generation, them sitting on the boards that they're passionate about and mission-driven, at that point, and then look for the idea on the private side, or at some point, maybe the public side. Now, the public side comes with more responsibility and liability.
Yes. Sure.
Just for everybody that's on listening, the D&O insurance, the director and officer insurance will help. And there's a lot of flavors of that D&O insurance to become an expert, with your attorney and others.
Yeah, it's interesting to know what it's like to be a fiduciary of an organization that you're not an owner of. Right? That type of relationship is interesting. And just the structure of how a board works is interesting. And I always find that insightful from a emotional intelligence and human interaction point to bring that back, because nobody on that board is your employee and you're not a boss. So there's the hierarchy, so to speak, of a colleague's board with fiduciary responsibilities to another organization is a different dynamic that uses other areas of the brain.
Well, it's the collaboration.
Yes.
We have a vision of what success looks like for that organization, and the symphony that comes together to support it and allow it to flourish and to service, what's the underlying customer at that point in that community. So it's important to give back. So let me ask you this: how does being a board member contribute to your own success?
Yes. So I think it's all about the relationships. As I think through the boards I've been on, those relationships have fostered other opportunities in business and elsewhere. So I'm a big believer that you develop relationships without an intentional outcome. And you just trust the process that at some point, a good percentage of those relationships will lead to some sort of concrete outcome. But you never know going in. So I feel that same way with board service, that my fellow board members, I don't know where that's going to be a benefit. And yet I've been on the earth long enough to know that there will be one if I'm just authentic and building relationships with them.
If you believe in the mission, I was on the board of directors for Scouting for 15 years. And my children had grown through that program. One of them earned his Eagle, and they're out flourishing on their own at this point. But I stayed involved with that organization. And it was a privilege to give back, because it was really making a positive impact on, let's see, I ran the STEM program for them, and I had about 14,000 youth participating.
Wow.
It's a lot, just think about that, getting a national lab involved. But again, it's about the community, and you give because it's in your heart to give, and it's a privilege to give. And that's the fun part.
It is. Yeah.
I'm interested in helping succeeding generation manage wealth responsibly. Do you have any insights for people in that position? Any advice from an expert?
I believe one of the best things a young person can do to build their own wealth is to really get into a relationship with a lot of people that are a lot wealthier than them. And that is something that is a little harder to assess on Twitter and a little bit easier maybe to get a sense of in person. So the reality is that, some of these relationships may indeed be virtual, but I would say, how as a young person do you identify 2 or 3 very wealthy individuals that might mentor you along in that journey? And people are excited about doing that, generally speaking. And then I would combine it with just education, like reading a bunch of books. So there certainly are principles to wealth building that are universal, but then there's how your strengths and desires interact with that. And that's very much an introspective process that is well informed by doing a bunch of reading and taking a bunch of courses and just exposing you to a lot of different methodologies. At some point, you have to choose where you're going to focus in order to get traction. But before then, it's like, just go taste a bunch of stuff until you can really get a sense of what you want to build some expertise in.
It's continuous learning, lifetime learning.
Yes, a commitment to that.
Yeah, so we're individually responsible for the individual learning at that point, and the ability to share that with our children about that hunger for knowledge and the rewards that come along with that, and then surrounding yourself with some really, really brilliant individuals and working collaboratively to all to thrive, and build
exactly
that. Yeah.
And at some point, you have to just get really, really good at one thing, right? If you look at people that are really, really wealthy, for the most part, you can say they got wealthy because of this thing. Okay. There's a bunch of other stuff they do, they're interested in, and they're relatively good at, or maybe quite good at, but it was one thing that generated their wealth, an expertise in one thing that probably got the most lift as a percentage to their wealth and everything else.
And real estate is probably one of the foremost for that wealth creation.
Yes, that's the other thing is, generally we know wealthy people, real estate is, I'm trying to think actually of anybody who's really wealthy that I know that doesn't have a lot of real estate. And I can't off the top of my head think of anybody. You get some of these massive tech startups, these unicorn, but that's not a strategy. Not everybody's going to do that. But everybody can buy real estate and buy a lot of it over a long period of time.
Excellent. And the appreciation that takes place.
Correct.
Yeah. What are the current trends you see in the market currently going forward? Any insights you can share with our listeners?
Yes. In the real estate market in particular, there's a real question mark about office space, right? There's just an enormous amount of square footage in this country that is probably never going to go back to office space.
Okay.
As we've seen this massive shift, of course, in how we all work. I subscribe to the idea that we're going to find a balance where, people will still, to some degree, go to the office. I don't think it's either or. It's going to be and. But for most companies, they're going to downsize their square footage, which is going to leave millions of square feet across the country ready for conversion into something else.
Okay.
Therein lies some opportunities. Now, it's going to take a while because those are, generally very structured deals owned by insurance companies, et cetera. So you're not going to see your downtown office building convert to, let's say, residential condos by 2023. But stuff like that is happening. So I would be looking for, REITs that might develop with that specific focus. I might be looking for local developers who are looking for LPs to help build out that conversion. But I think that's a huge opportunity to go from commercial to other usages, be them warehouse spaces, residential units, in the coming decade as our society really pivots from how we utilize space.
It's an important model.
It is. It is.
COVID really shook the market at this point. If we're talking about New York City or some of the major cities at this point, there was an exit. I was just speaking to an esteemed lawyer from Prior Cashman, where the real estate in New York City, the apartments prices are back up now.
Yes, they
so
are.
There was a low decrease, but now the market is back. The office space, it's a TBD to understand that market and what it's going to look like.
It is. We know there's going to be less of it, but what we don't yet know is how much less and what to do with the excess and how much that's going to cost. What you're just pointing to is also huge. Is just residential real estate. The truth is, unfortunately, that residential real estate is becoming more and more difficult for people to get into. So, if you're not in residential real estate as, either as a first-time home buyer, as a young person or whatever, or as an owner of residential rental properties, I would say look at that because the prices are only going up. That becomes really quite a great deal. We're years away from building enough supply to manage the demand there. So the next decade, I think from a residential real estate standpoint, from a price appreciation, we'll do well.
That's interesting. You look at the school debt for those that are financing their college and university educations, you're looking at the appreciation or inflation, probably combined at this point, on real estate. And you're looking at your ability to actually buy into a market is becoming more difficult. And what will that look like long-term, in a market at this point? It's interesting. Yeah, I don't have the real answer. It's just...
Yeah, we need to build more housing units is what we need to do. But there's a lot of issues around that. They go to a local zoning meeting of a developer proposing a bunch of units and watch what happens.
Okay.
Right. So yeah, it'll be very interesting in the next 10 years to see how we satisfy this supply demand issue in residential housing.
So you're really bringing something up, that government has a fiduciary responsibility for zoning and permitting to allow that continual expansion. Well, we know that they need more tax dollars. We probably all can agree, our listeners. The only way they're going to get more tax dollars is either get more money out of each individual, or let's increase the amount of building that takes place. So the revenue's coming over more housing units or more warehousing space, whatever it may be in that community. And it allows people to have jobs closer to where the housing is. So the transportation is less stressed.
Yes.
Balance.
There's a balance, and at the moment, it's really out of balance. I think that most zoning ordinances are not up to speed with that, but a lot of it's too the community dynamics. You get a lot of, I don't want those multi-unit housing or increased density in my neighborhood. Yeah. And so, I think as a society, we're really wrestling with this question of everybody seems to want affordable housing,
very good,
but not willing to make the zoning concessions in their neighborhood that would deliver on affordable housing. And so, I don't know how we solve that, but I see that tension in my portfolio all the time. And it creates an enormous amount of time, energy, and resources that make housing more expensive.
Excellent. That's what it is. Time is money.
Mm-hmm.
So the repurposing of certain real estate may lend itself for that conversion, as you're suggesting.
It might
be some additional housing, could be the hotels and other resources that are out there. And I think our youth is probably more open to a shared community where you may have a kitchen, and it may be something where more than one occupant of that condominium may have access to. So when you do the rebuild in a hotel, what does that look like at this commercial kitchen? And we're going down to eat, and it's providing a very high level of service for them, and they can come and go, and it's got extended hours. Do we all want to cook? That's a good question. I don't know that answer. Do our kids want to go out and cook, or would they be open to the idea of having something where it's a shared, solution on multiple services?
Yeah. There seems to be a lot of space for innovation on the, let's call it, before you have family and kids demographic, right? I think once you have family and kids, people seem to slot themselves in very traditional and predictable ways, right? But before then, and that period of time is growing to be, a larger amount of time in one's life than it was, say, 20 years ago, or maybe longer. There could be opportunities for innovation around the use of space and group living or more dense living generally. You see that in New York a lot, right, with these pods and so forth. So I certainly could see that trend expanding to other areas of the country over time.
Opportunities.
Sure.
Is there anything I haven't touched on that you would like to add or expand on?
No, I really appreciate the dialogue today, and thank you for having me on the show.
Brandon, it's a privilege. How can our listeners contact you? Are there any links that you would like to share?
Sure. Yes. If you want to learn more about me, then you can go to brandongreene.com. If you're interested in the company, then go to alchemyofmoney.co. Yes.
Spell both websites.
Sure. So brandongreene.com is just brandongreeen.com. And alchemyofmoney.co is alchemy, ALCHEMY of money, MONEY.co. Alchemyofmoney.co takes you to the organization, and brandongreene.com takes you to a place where you can learn a little bit more about me personally.
Fantastic. I want to thank you so much for your time, Brandon. Success seems to follow you, and surely our listeners will gain valuable insights from your story and your message.
Thank you, Cliff.
I appreciate that. Thank you to our listeners. I look forward to being back with you shortly for another episode of the Private Equity Profits Podcast. This show has been produced by Market Domination LLC.